proposing limited airstrikes against key Gaddafi targets, such as his headquarters and a military airbase. There was no official confirmation from President Sarkozy's office, and it's a highly controversial proposal that would meet with strong resistance from many European allies, who are also wary of giving the rebel representatives diplomatic recognition at this stage.
That's a decision by a single government. I think it's better for us to listen to the stance of the entire European community.
The Elysee Palace says that Mr. Sarkozy is seeking legal authority to prevent the use of force by Gaddafi. It believes that jamming his communications would be a good start. Tim Friend, AlJazeera, Paris.
We're joined now by Tariq Youssef from the Dubai School of Government. Thanks so much for coming in. As you may have heard, I was talking earlier just a moment ago with somebody inside Ras Al Hanouf about the fighting there. What's happened there? Is that a setback, or is this a serious, a more serious sort of defeat for the rebel forces?
I think it could be a more serious setback than what happened a few days ago. Ras Al Hanouf is of strategic importance to the regime. It's been heavily bombarded by air, sea, and by artillery pieces in the last couple of days. But it's also sustained considerable damage. So the usefulness of the strategic asset deriving from the oil installations, the export terminal, might be limited. The value might be moral and political for Gaddafi's loyalists. It remains to be seen whether in the morning government loyalists have consolidated their entire control over the city of Ras Al Hanouf and could extend that to Brega, or whether the rebels will push back again, as we saw in Bin Jawad just yesterday and today.
Well, from what we've heard there from speaking to someone inside the city, he said it's basically divided into two at this point. How easy is it going to be for the rebels to try and hold off a government push into other places, like you mentioned Brega, looking at the sort of equipment and training that they have?
Yeah. Clearly, the equipment and the military preparation is on the side of government forces. Now, unless this becomes a street-to-street, sort of Zenga-to-Zenga fight, in which the rebels will be able to possibly fend off the army units and push back and maintain their hold. But it is possible, and we should be prepared for the possibility in the next few days
that would go on for a very long time, wouldn't it?
Very long time.
It's not going to be an easy. Would foreign intervention bolster Gaddafi's standing and support for him?
I don't think so. I think foreign intervention at this point, with the minimal no-fly zone proposed, would send a very important signal, would take out the air defenses and the air attacks out of the equation, and would probably force Gaddafi and his forces to consolidate, push back a bit towards Sirte, towards Tripoli, and maintain the territories that they feel most comfortable and confident of, and the ones that don't require the air cover that they have enjoyed in the last couple of days.
All right, in addition to the military offensive, let's not forget there is a diplomatic offensive going on. Have the rebels gained ground diplomatically with what's coming out of the GCC countries and what's coming out of Paris?
Certainly in the last 24 hours, I think they've gotten a lot of good news on that front. The recognition from Paris, the statement from the UK and France today, and the GCC statement, especially given that it represents an important bloc within the Arab League, is remarkably strong.
Perhaps even unprecedented. I can't remember the last time a GCC statement came out to call an Arab country illegitimate, or an Arab government illegitimate.
I am not aware of a single time in the modern history of the Arab League where a bloc has come out and essentially considered the government illegitimate in the eyes of the sitting leaders. But that's just something about the moment and its importance, and the fact that this is a battle perceived largely to be between a sitting autocrat using brutal tactics against his people and the will of the people at a moment when the entire Arab world seems to be in revolt against autocratic regimes. So the context here is also important.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how much of an impact those statements have. Thanks so much for coming in and talking to us about this subject. Well, the US President's top intelligence chief says the longer the conflict in Libya drags on, the more likely it is that Muammar Gaddafi's forces could prevail. Well, for more on this, let's cross over to Daljit Dhaliwal in our Washington Broadcast Center. Daljit, different signals coming out of Washington.
That's right, Sammy. Well, according to the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, now he says that the Libyan leader has superior weapons and the ability to replenish his forces. But his assessment was quickly disputed by the National Security Advisor. Patty Culhane has more.
If the rebels in Libya were looking for reassurance as they fight for their lives and freedom, they got the exact opposite from Washington, as the man in charge of all U.S. intelligence agencies forecasted their eventual defeat and a Gaddafi victory.
I think over the longer term that the regime will prevail.
James Clapper told Congress because Colonel Muammar Gaddafi's forces have superior weapons and logistical capabilities, at best, rebels could hope for a stalemate, an outcome the U.S. doesn't want to see. But officials have also made it clear that the U.S. won't be the only country taking steps to prevent that.
The United States acting alone would be stepping into a situation whose consequences are unforeseeable. And I know that's the way our military feels. It's easy for people to say, do this, do that, and then they turn and say, okay, U.S., go do it.
Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, for the first time, downplaying the potential effectiveness of a no-fly zone, saying it failed to stop the violence in Iraq or Kosovo. The U.S. instead is focusing on diplomatic moves, cutting ties with the Libyan embassy, and Clinton is planning to meet with Libyan opposition leaders next week.
We are still engaged in the process of assessing those groups, the council, and other individuals to find out what their vision is, who they represent, what their ideas are, and where they would take Libya in a post-Gaddafi future.
The Obama administration trying to take back the comments from its very own Director of National Intelligence, the National Security Advisor, telling reporters that Director Clapper was making a static assessment, simply looking at the number of tanks and the kinds of weapons. But if you include things like Gaddafi's isolation or the motivation of the rebels, well, you could come up with a much different assessment. Now, the administration has been very carefully trying to get to Gaddafi's inner circle, to send the message that they will lose. You have to wonder if they're still happy with their Director of National Intelligence after he sent the message to the world that they'll likely win. Patty Culhane, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Well, Bruce Gentleson is a former senior advisor to the U.S. State Department, and he's currently a political science professor at Duke University, and he joins me now from North Carolina. Thank you very much for being with us, Professor. First of all, let me ask you about the controversy of the day here in Washington. We saw the U.S. intelligence chief saying that Gaddafi will win, and then you have a top White House official quickly coming out and dismissing what James Clapper had to say. How do you read these mixed signals? What do you think that they add up to in terms of the administration's approach towards Libya?
I think the administration really needs to speak with one voice. During the Egypt crisis, there was a problem at certain points where it seemed like it was speaking with different voices. I think the fact that the National Security Advisor, Tom Donilon, responded so quickly and so firmly really means that his message is the priority one. I also think that even if the Intelligence Director Clapper was right in his assessment, the message is that's all the more reason for the international community to act to make sure that that doesn't